In Tower Defense Simulator, there are 3 towers that generate cash otherwise than by dealing damage towards enemies. The first one being the farm. Yeah, this is the main economy tower in Tower Defense Simulator. Now, a fun fact about the farm is that it can actually damage enemies. You just need to combine it with a certain event tower, that being the harvester, and the harvester needs to be kind of in range of the thorns that it generates. So yes, while technically the farm is mainly an economy-based tower, it can somewhat deal damage towards enemies under rare circumstances and with an event tower that is becoming even more rarer by the day. The next one is the cowboy. Yeah, the cowboy is a weird one. It generates cash, yes, but it generates it per shot of an eligible enemy. So for example, it doesn't actually contribute cash shots for enemies that are not naturally spawning. So for example, the breaker enemies, after the first breaker that naturally spawns in, they don't generate any cash for the cowboy. Interesting though, the lead enemies do generate cash for the cowboy, which I find extremely odd given the fact that summoned enemies do not, but I guess it's something to do with the fact that, technically speaking, the cowboy would be able to damage lead if it was for, say, the firework technician, because it just doesn't have the detection to damage lead. And also, some people saying that the partner here is a typo on the cowboy's description in the store. It's not. The third tower to generate cash otherwise than by damaging enemies is the DJ booth, obviously with its green tracks. Yes, its ability is able to generate cash for yourself. However, other than those 3 towers, there are no other economy-based towers in Tower Defense Simulator. However, another one was planned, and in fact, it was planned when the cowboy wasn't considered an economy-based tower, and the DJ booth wasn't an economy-based tower at all. So we have to go all the way back to the 19th of August 2019 into a Discord channel that is now deleted, meaning that you can't really see it. So I have to get screenshots from my old videos. But here you can see below Natural in his old avatar. On the 19th of August 2019, it says, voting on the next tower, A for the medic, support can remove debuffs with ability, resurrect dead towers once, heal the base HP, give slight tower buffs. Now, the medic would get the remove debuff with ability. Resurrect dead towers once. That's interesting, given the fact that this was being polled at the time when the raider boss could actually kill dead towers, but they had an animation which meant they were dead for like a certain period of time before you could actually sell it and get your money back. However, here it looks like the medic could have been able to resurrect a dead tower. Perhaps that would be an ability that I would talk about later, given the fact that the medic did not get this ability. Heal the base health, yep, we get that, and give slight tower buffs. I mean, kinda, but no, it doesn't. It only gets the remove debuffs ability. Next, we have the chainsaw. Well, actually, the shredder. See, below Natural, before resting on the shredder name for release in 2019, actually called this the chainsaw. And I mean, from this grainy image, yes, you can see it does have a chainsaw here, and the shredder actually would get a chainsaw at max level. Anyways, here is an offensive melee, extremely fast damage, shoot piercing saw glaives, shred. Yeah, that's pretty much accurate. I'm not entirely sure about shooting piercing saw glaives, it's just shooting knives, but fair enough. However, the third one leaked here, C for the mine, income, money over time instead of per wave. Now, interestingly here, it's not really mentioned that the mine is a replacement for the farm, but instead it's money over time, rather instead per wave. However, out of all the towers here, it's the only one that was not added, and in fact, it is the least voted upon option. A for the medic. Medic got 4,300 votes as of the time of recording this video, which I believe was about 2021. B got 2,500, and C, which was the mine, 1,463. Now, interestingly, Below Natural said that all of these towers would be added down the line. This poll just chooses which comes out in the next update. The medic indeed came out in the next update. The shredder would come out after that in the Halloween update, but the mine, never. The mine has never been released to Tower Defense Simulator, nor is it ever planned to be released to Tower Defense Simulator. So as far as we know, the mine is a cancelled tower. So I might as well just speculate what the mine is going to do. Or was going to do. So very clearly, income, money over time instead of per wave. This is unlike the farm, which generates money over waves rather than over time. And in fact, it's kind of similar, if you really think about it, to the DJ booth, where the DJ booth can generate money from certain towers, well, from all towers basically, within its range, over a certain period of time, a 30-second period of time cooldown. Technically speaking, that is money over time, given the fact that the DJ booth has a cooldown which limits the ability to every 30 seconds. I mean, it can be shortened down with skills or whatever, but mainly 30 seconds for the DJ booth. This is also technically unlike the cowboy, which, I mean, to be fair, having a certain rigid economy tower in the game, and then having 3 of those actually being very distinct from each other is actually quite cool. So the farm obviously does it per wave, the cowboy does it per enemy, and the DJ booth does it per tower, and technically over per time. The mine, had it been added, actually would have been kind of unique to all of those 3 in that it's money over time instead of per wave. Now, of course, given the fact that the mine tower was never added to Tower Defense Simulator, we only know from the screenshots what it looks like, and we don't know anything about like level 5, level 4, level 3, level 2, and in fact, I'm assuming that the version shown off here is the level 0 version. And I mean, it does what it says on the tin, really. It's just a mine shaft with some rocks around it. In fact, these rocks are very similar to the rocks that were used in certain maps by Adversary as these back in the day. And in fact, if you ask me, it looks kind of similar to the Badlands modern mine shaft. Do bear in mind that Badlands wasn't remade until about the Overhaul update, whereas the mine here was leaked in 2019, a full year before the Badlands rework. So if you ask me, it kind of looks very similar to this mine shaft here, given the fact it's wooden and everything like that. And the rocks here are like kind of similar to the rocks that were used in the mines. And in fact, this is more appropriate, I feel, compared to this mine tower here. I mean, yeah, it is the rocks are lighter in this version, but it is very similar. And a fun little Easter egg that you already may know of, in Badlands, the original version, there is every 30 seconds a minecart runs from here to over here that contains your adversary in it, and when it's not being used, it appears here. So as you can see, this is your adversary's model, at least back in the day. Yeah, it still does it, so it'll just run across here and then come into here. It just hides here and just resets back over there every 30 seconds or so. Now, this cache over time instead of per wave has actually been used in Tower Defense Simulator. Twice, actually. However, they were all in Defender Center maps. So, in Cold Ambush, you could buy plots around the map to increase the amount of cash that this Christmas tree here has and gives out per time. I think it was like every 60 seconds or something? No, sorry, every 30 seconds. But this wasn't the first one to have it. Quite famously, Doom's Revenge was the first map in Tower Defense Simulator to be based on Defender Center, but also it was the first map to use cash over time instead of per wave. I mean, this map would also use per wave as like wave bonuses and stuff, but it would actually use per time mainly for economy. So when you bought all of the plots on Doom's Revenge, you would get 7,050 passive income, which I think is similar in concept to the Mine Tower in that for Ducky's Revenge map, every 40 seconds you would get your cash. However, for the mine, it's not really stated how much it would be. I mean, obviously, the only thing we know of its abilities is the fact that Below Natural said it's over time rather than per wave. And like the economy back in 2019 is very different to the economy right now. Had the mine tower been added in 2019 and reworked over the years until now, it would be very different to what it was in 2019. However, Doom's Revenge does give us some insight into what the mine tower would have done. So like every so and so seconds, the mine tower would give you a certain amount of money depending on what level it was. Now, at the time of the poll being made, the farm tower didn't have a placement limit. Yeah, fun fact, before the overhaul update, the farm didn't have a placement limit. In fact, in the overhaul update, it was planned to have a placement limit of 6 before it was buffed to 8, I believe. However, given the fact that some games in Tower Defense Simulator back in the day could last for very long times, the mine tower probably would have had a placement limit. Now, this was 2019, therefore meaning that we had some maps that were horribly, say, balanced in comparison to the meta now. I know this because I made a map. But Mount Million, for example, a feature of towers back in the day was that near the spawn of the map, you could easily spawn kill most enemies. However, in Mount Million, that was nearly impossible, given the fact that the path of the Mount Million map was kind of away from the ground spots and the cliff spots for towers in this map, thereby meaning that Mount Million probably had one of the longer triumph times in Tower Defense Simulator compared to other maps. Going further back still, in Canyon, what most people do, they will place towers near these bends here, but because the bends were all the way down from where enemies spawned in, it meant that Canyon also took a really long period of time to actually beat. Not so much end of the line, because you could really place towers right beside the spawn points here. And then you have the original version of Badlands, where what most people would do was they would place towers near the end of the map, because this is where the paths would intersect, meaning that games would last a pretty long period of time, standard-wise, because I mean, firstly, there were double the amount of enemies, but also most people weren't spawn killing enemies, as was the norm back in the day. I mean, it was also the case for like Doomspire, for example, where most enemies would actually get past into the center of the map, because A, it's a very short map, but B, there was actually very little spots to actually place your towers, and here you actually had to utilize stacking, which is now a forbidden sin in Tower Defense Simulator nowadays. Like, could you imagine this map in Tower Defense Simulator? It'll be impossible to beat. What I'm getting at here is that because the length of games in Tower Defense Simulator varied a lot, from like close to like 30 minutes for some games, which, by the way, in Tower Defense Simulator, that's actually quite a short period of time nowadays, because there were like 58 waves back then. Sorry, 68 waves. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, the maximum amount of waves that Tower Defense Simulator had, at least at the time of the mine towers being leaked, was 68 waves. So some games lasted about 30-ish minutes, 40 minutes on the regular. However, some maps like this would last, I don't know, 50 minutes, 60 minutes. I think the triumph that I did for Doomspire actually lasted about 50 minutes. Like, people complain about how long Fallen mode is nowadays, like 30 minutes, 40 minutes. Yeah, go back in time, those were like regular times for entire Fallen mode matches. Or, well, Insane mode matches as it was called back then. So, the Mine Tower, you could actually stall enough. It could be a very powerful tower, especially because the freezer at the time had an ability where you could literally freeze all enemies apart from bosses, which there were like 4 bosses back then. And a common strategy that people would use was just to spam this ability over and over again, meaning that A, you gave more time to towers to actually beat all of the enemies on the map, which back in the day, a lot of spam. So something like the Rocketeer would easily be very useful during games, but also, because of this, you're delaying the amount of time that it takes to defeat the enemies. The Mine Tower, had it been added, would have actually been very useful, because back in the day, the Farm Tower was not as useful as much. The reason for this is because the economy back in the day was whack. Most people got their economy based on tower hits on enemies, and the farm wasn't as heavily relied upon. In fact, the only time that I ever really used the farm in like 2019 was to quickly generate cash when other people were about, in mega servers only, because in mega servers, I think the economy was just like busted. Had the Mine Tower actually been used, because you were doing it over time rather than per wave, and only really, the farm was only really useful at the very beginning of the game before like wave 10, the Mine Tower actually probably would have been useful depending on its statistics. However, of course, this is all just speculation, and given the fact that the Mine Tower was only leaked in 2019 by that picture by Below Natural, alongside the Medic and the Shredder, we can assume that it never got past the voting stage. I would also have to imagine that because of the varying lengths in Tower Defense Simulator of the games, especially depending on each game mode, even back in the day, back in 2019, when you had Easy Mode, which only had 35 waves, and then Insane Mode, which had 68 waves, it would have been incredibly difficult to actually balance the Mine Tower. I mean, for heaven's sake, the Farm Tower, in of itself, wasn't even balanced back in the day. So imagine having another tower doing economy, but instead of doing it per wave, you do it per time. And I guess the niches of the Mine Tower and the Farm Tower overlapped so much that they probably would have made each other redundant depending on which one was the meta at the time. So yeah, it's kind of understandable why the Mine Tower actually never reached the light of day. But it's kind of sad. We could have had another tower. In fact, another tower was planned. The Mine Tower was planned, let's not forget. But oh well, we only have 3 economy towers, not 4.